The 15th of April, 1945, southwest of Bergen, Nazi Germany. The British 11th Armoured Division liberates Bergen Belsen, one of the worst Nazi concentration camps, which would epitomize the true bestiality and horrors of the Nazi regime and its death camps. The British forces find 13,000 unburied dead bodies and almost 60,000 prisoners who are sick and starved. More than 13,000 former prisoners, too ill to recover, will die of various diseases such as typhus and tuberculosis during the months following the camp's liberation. The British forces capture male and female Nazi personnel responsible for these horrors and force them to help bury the dead bodies in mass graves. One of them is Gertrud Sauer. Gertrud Sauer was born on the 8th of September 1904 in Görlitz, then part of the German Empire. She was 28 years old when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came into power in January 1933. With the Nazi rise to power, the party ordered anti-Jewish economic boycotts, staged book burnings, and enacted discriminatory anti-Jewish legislation. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws racially defined Jews by blood and ordered the total separation of so-called Aryans and non-Aryans, thereby legalizing racist hierarchy. On the night of the 9th of November 1938, the Nazis destroyed synagogues and the shop windows of Jewish-owned stores throughout Germany and Austria. This event, which came to be known as the Kristallnacht pogrom, or Night of Broken Glass, marked a transition to an era of destruction in which genocide would become the singular focus of Nazi anti-Semitism. The Nazis murdered Jewish people in mass killings by shooting, administering poison gas, exhaustion, and overwork, and in specifically constructed killing centers, which were part of the Nazi camp system. The Nazi camp system began as a system of repression directed against political opponents of the Nazi state. In the early years of the Third Reich, the Nazis imprisoned primarily communists and socialists. In about 1935, the regime also began to imprison those whom it designated as racially or biologically inferior, especially the Jews. During World War II, the organization and scale of the Nazi camp system expanded rapidly, and the purpose of the camps evolved beyond imprisonment toward forced labor and outright murder. Throughout German-occupied Europe, the Germans arrested those who resisted their domination and those they judged to be racially inferior or politically unacceptable. People arrested for resisting German rule were mostly sent to forced labor or concentration camps. The Second World War, which began on the 1st of September 1939, brought unprecedented growth in both the number of camps and the number of prisoners. Within 3 years, the number of prisoners quadrupled, from about 25,000 before the war to about 100,000 in March 1942. The camp population came to include prisoners from almost every European nation. Prisoners in all the concentration camps were literally worked to death. According to SS reports, there were more than 700,000 prisoners registered in the concentration camps in January 1945. The Germans deported Jews from all over occupied Europe to extermination camps in Poland, where they were systematically killed, and also to concentration camps where they were drafted into forced labor, which was extermination through work. Several 100,000 Roma people and Soviet prisoners of war were also systematically murdered. Part of the Nazi camp system also became Gertrud Sauer, who at the beginning of the war was a married saleswoman in Osnabrück, but went back to her hometown Görlitz because her house had been bombed. She then worked in a munitions factory. In April 1944, she was conscripted as a guard, and in September of the same year was sent to Gross-Rosen concentration camp. The camp was used for forced labor, and the female prisoners worked in the textile and munitions factories. The textile factory would produce material that would be used for uniforms, army coats, parachutes, and blankets that the German military needed. Jewish prisoners did not begin arriving in the main camp until the fall of 1944, with the evacuation of Auschwitz. As of the 1st of January 1945, the Gross-Rosen complex, which was a vast network of at least 97 subcamps, held 76,728 prisoners. Nearly 26,000 of these were women, most of them Jews. This was one of the largest groupings of female prisoners in the entire concentration camp system. As Soviet forces approached in January 1945, the Germans began to evacuate the Gross-Rosen complex, dissolving the subcamps east of the Oder. In early February 1945, the SS evacuated the main camp and subsequently additional subcamps west of Oder. SS guards escorted at least 44,000 prisoners, many of whom were Jews, mostly on freight trains and under brutal conditions, to Bergen Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau, Flossenburg, Mauthausen, Mittelbau-Dora, and Neuengamme camps in the German Reich. Many prisoners died during the evacuations due to the lack of food and water. SS guards killed prisoners who became too weak to continue. These forced evacuations of concentration camp prisoners over long distances under guard and in extremely harsh conditions became known as the Death Marches. Soviet forces liberated the main Gross-Rosen camp on the 13th of February 1945. It is estimated that of the 120,000 prisoners who passed through the Gross-Rosen camp system, at least 40,000 died, either in Gross-Rosen or during the evacuation of the camp. Sauer took part in one such death march, and on the 28th of February 1945, she and other prisoners arrived in Bergen Belsen. At the end of July 1944, there were around 7,300 prisoners interned in the Bergen Belsen camp complex. At the beginning of December 1944, this number had increased to around 15,000, and in February 1945, the number of prisoners was 22,000. As prisoners evacuated from the east continued to arrive, the camp population soared to over 60,000 by the 15th of April 1945. The camp was so overcrowded that during the winter months when it was freezing cold, the prisoners had to sleep in a sitting position on the floor and somehow try to share only 200 blankets in a camp of tens of thousands of prisoners. From late 1944, food rations throughout Bergen Belsen continued to shrink, and by early 1945, prisoners would sometimes go without food for days, and fresh water was also in short supply. Sanitation was incredibly inadequate, with very few latrines and water faucets for the tens of thousands of prisoners interned in Bergen Belsen at this time. Overcrowding, poor sanitary conditions, and a lack of adequate food, water, and shelter led to an outbreak of diseases such as typhus, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and dysentery, causing an ever-increasing number of deaths. In the first few months of 1945, tens of thousands of prisoners died. Those who survived described the conditions in the camp as hell on earth. After 3 days at Bergen Belsen, Sauer began to work in the wood commando, working outside the camp, and after that she spent 2 days in the peeling department in kitchen number 2 in the men's compound, 2 days in the women's compound number 2, and a whole week in the bathhouse. The bathhouses were designed to disinfect 400 prisoners and their clothing every day. Steam flowing out of the floor killed lice to protect the prisoners from typhus and other diseases. Because disinfecting clothing took longer than disinfecting prisoners, the poor prisoners had to wait outside, wet and naked in the cold weather. Despite the fact that people were dying all around at Bergen Belsen, Sauer would regularly beat the prisoners not only with her hand, but also with a stick and a riding whip she always carried with her. The prisoner Sunshine, who worked in Sauer's cookhouse, later testified that she saw her on a few occasions beating the girls in the kitchen and pulling their hair. On one occasion, Maria Neumann, a fully trained Polish nurse, then a prisoner at Bergen Belsen, saw a man taking a meatless bone out of the swill tub outside kitchen number 1. Neumann later testified how Sauer, a strong, thick-set woman, went and beat the man about the head and body with a stick, and then picked up the male prisoner, who looked like a living skeleton, without difficulty, and threw him into a ditch. Then Sauer went to Neumann and beat her simply for standing there and watching what was happening. On the 15th of April 1945, when the British liberated Bergen Belsen, they found around 60,000 starving prisoners in the camp, most of them seriously ill. On the 17th of April, 2 days after Bergen Belsen's liberation, Gertrud Sauer was captured by the British forces together with her fellow Nazi criminal colleagues such as Josef Kramer, the commandant of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and the last commandant of Bergen Belsen. After evacuating Bergen Belsen, British forces burned down the whole camp to prevent the spread of typhus. During its existence, approximately 50,000 persons died in Bergen Belsen, and more than 13,000 former prisoners, too ill to recover, died after liberation. Justice finally caught up with Sauer when she was tried at the Belsen Trial, which began on the 17th of September 1945. During the trial, when the witnesses testified how she mistreated the prisoners, Sauer responded that she never used a stick or whip, and that she only beat prisoners with her hand when she caught them stealing vegetables. Sauer said, "I believe that the prisoners told the truth when they said that I beat them by slapping their faces. But that was not brutal enough for the British officers, and therefore they invented a riding whip." When she was asked about the prisoner whom she had beaten and thrown into a ditch, She responded that she would never do such a thing. However, her lies did not help her escape justice. On the 17th of November, 1945, the British military tribunal found Gertrud Sauer, then 41 years old, guilty of crimes committed at Bergen Belsen, and sentenced her to 10 years imprisonment. Unlike Irma Gräser, known as the hyena of Auschwitz, who used to kick the prisoners with her heavy boots and beat them with her woven leather whip, which was covered in cellophane, so that human blood could be easily washed from it, Sauer avoided the death sentence and in the end spent only 6 years in prison until she was released in December 1951. Nothing more is known, either about her remaining life or of how she died. There were no tears shed for Gertrud Sauer. Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.